It's time once again for another edition of Talk to Me. And now, here's Emmy himself, 8-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, Maynard Eaton.
Hello again, my friends, and welcome to our post-Christmas edition of Talk to Me. Merry Christmas to you, and Merry Christmas to our guest, our first return guest in 9 months of doing this show, Attorney Gerald Griggs. Attorney, hey, thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
Thank you, sir. I would imagine, though, under your Christmas tree, you would have wanted a voter purge lawsuit victory. You fought hard for that. You and the Black Voters Matters went to court for that. What did you get? What did happen in that suit?
Well, we didn't get the initial stay and placing back on the rolls. We didn't get the injunction that we wanted, but we did get an order from the judge mandating a meeting to sit down to go over the inaccuracies that are in the Secretary of State's voter purge system. So it was a slight win. And so hopefully for the new year, we'll get a complete win as this case continues on.
Now, you did go back to court. We'll show some pictures of that. You did go back to court seeking, not the court, to the Secretary of State's office, seeking what?
Seeking that meeting. Like I said, in the order, the judge was quite specific, telling us to sit down. And so we gave Secretary of State a week to set up the meeting. He didn't set up the meeting, so we delivered formal demand of a meeting. And so hopefully he will abide by that. But we have certified proof that we served him. So if we go back to court, the judge is going to have some difficult questions for the Secretary of State as to why he didn't follow the judge's order.
Explain to our viewers and to many of us what's going on with our elections in Georgia. President Trump alleges there's voter fraud, voter rigging, Black Voters Matter, and you say there's voter suppression. Are Georgia's voting system that messed up?
I think we have some issues with the people running the voting systems. And I think we have a serious voter suppression issue. And so that's why the Secretary of State, either the previous Secretary of State, who's now the governor, or this current Secretary of State, have been sued so many times. And many of those pieces of litigation have been wins for the plaintiff. So I just think we got to get to free and fair elections. We should have open elections where everybody that's legally able to vote should be able to vote. And I think we would get to somewhere around 8 to 9 million registered voters in a state of 10 million. So I think that's what we're moving towards, and hopefully we will be successful moving. People on both sides will understand that to have a free and fair election, everybody should be able to participate. So that's what the conversation we're trying to have. There's clearly shown there's no massive voter fraud that's going on. Both our Attorney General and the Attorney General of the United States have said there's no evidence of massive voter fraud. But there's clear evidence in 7 lawsuits that there's voter suppression going on. And in 6 of those lawsuits, the Secretary of State, either this one or the previous one, has lost. And in this particular lawsuit, it's still ongoing.
Gerald, I'm old enough to remember the C.T. Vivians and Hosea Williams and others of your ilk who fought against voter suppression. Are we saying, for a young attorney like yourself, and you and C.K. Hoffer, for example, the problems today are as bad as they were yesterday in the early days of the civil rights movement?
I think we're facing the same problems, but luckily we still have legends of the civil rights movement like Fred Gray, who joined in this litigation, that can lead the next generation of attorneys who can train the new generation of attorneys on how to fight this. Because we've been successful in the past, we will continue to be successful. So yes, we're fighting the same sort of tactics, but we're getting wins. We're seeing record numbers of individuals participate in our election process. And when you see record numbers participate, we usually get the outcome that we want to see. So we are hopeful that we will continue to be progressive in mindset and continue to win in court, to win at the ballot box, and ultimately to win with legislation. So I believe that, yes, we are facing the same problems, and we will get the same victories that our ancestors did.
Well said. Our last guest was Attorney C.K. Hoffer. She spoke highly of you. You and Miss Barbara Arnsberg make a great team. How did that come about?
Well, a call went out. I got a call from Greg Pallas. I got a call from Barbara Arnwine and C.K. Hoffler, and they wanted me to join the team. And then they sprung on me that I would be able to work with one of the people that I looked up to, and that's Fred Gray. And so I jumped at the opportunity to be a part of this voter litigation, and hopefully we'll have more voter litigation moving forward in the spirit of Fred Gray, in the spirit of Thurgood Marshall, in the spirit of so many great lawyers, Donald Lee Hollowell, that led to my matriculation through law school and ultimately into the practice of law. So hopefully I'm giving back to my community the same way they did.
Has the practice of law fueled your activism? You've been a very busy man this year. Or is it just you as a black man using law to fuel your activism?
I think it's a little bit of both. I became a lawyer because I saw great lawyers of the past like Thurgood and Johnny fight for rights and help our community. And then once I became an attorney, I just understood that the law is a tool to give rights to those that have been oppressed. So I'm just using the tools that I have, both as an activist and as an attorney, to help my community. And so it's been a blessing. 16 years of practicing law, had the longest case in Georgia history, had the biggest march in Georgia history, and now we get to work with legends of the civil rights movement. So it's just been a wonderful journey, and we are not done yet.
Not to mention that you're an official with the NAACP as well. So you're wearing a lot of hats here, aren't you, young man?
I am. But again, like I said before, I look up to giants of the past, whether that's Charles Hamilton Houston or Thurgood, who did the same thing, who carved out legal strategy with the partnership with the association that has given us so many rights that we have right now, and will continue to protect the rights as we move forward. So yes, I wear a lot of hats, and hopefully there will be other lawyers that come up after me that will pick up the mantle and continue on like my mentors told me to do, being Dr. Vivian or Representative Lewis.
Talk about Black Voters Matter and Black Lives Matter. Twin pursuits, similar efforts, or do you see a distinction between the two groups?
I see them being two distinct groups with the same purpose. And so just like in the civil rights movement, when you had the SCLC and you had SNCC, you have different pursuits. Black Voters Matter is typically an older organization. You have older African Americans who are carrying on the civil rights movement through voter empowerment. Black Lives Matter is more of a grassroots activism of people in the streets. But I see them merging their goals, merging their tactics to have one continuation of the movement. Because again, it was never just one movement. It was a continuation of movement. So whether you have abolition movement, civil rights movement, now Black Lives Matter movement, it's the same movement. So I see them as distinct groups that have the same goal, and they're being quite successful moving the marches to political power and ultimately electoral power. Wow.
Attorney Griggs, what is this 2020 meant? We have a week left, a year of racial reckoning, Black Lives Matter. You've been involved in all of it. Has it made a difference? Has it been racial reckoning, or are we still just knocking on the door?
I think absolutely 2020 has been a banner year. I believe it's sort of up there with 1968 and some of the other banner years, 1945. And so I think that we've seen a lot of progress, even though we had a lot of loss. I mean, we faced a 100-year pandemic, and then we also faced a 401-year pandemic. So whether it's COVID-19 or COVID or racism 1619, we've been fighting twin pandemics, and we've been very successful. But we've also lost a lot of legends in the movement. We've lost brothers and sisters on the front line, whether that was Ahmaud, Breonna, George, Ray Shard, Vincent, and so many others, and Vincent Truitt, and so many others. And then we lost Dr. Vivian. Of course, we lost Representative Lewis. We just lost so many, but the movement continues on. And so I think that 2020 will be a year that we never forget, whether we lost, thousands of African Americans to the virus, or we lost hundreds of African Americans to police violence. And so I just think that this is one of those years that everybody's going to look back and see, what were you doing? Were you a part of the biggest protest in American history, which is the George Floyd protest? And did you amplify your voice and your talents to give to this new movement to make sure that we win? We saw a boycott by NBA players because of the situations that were going on. We saw Black Lives Matter painted on streets and painted on courts, but will we see Black Lives Matter painted in legislation like the George Floyd police reform bill or the John Lewis Voting Rights Act? So we have to continue the message, and hopefully 2021 will be an epic year. But we closed out 2020 very strong by sending the racist in chief home.
How did you see your role in 2020? Like I said earlier, you've been quite active. You've been seen in a lot of different fronts. Television cameras love you. The courts like you. What's been Gerald Griggs' role in 2020?
Well, I think my role was to be an agitator. My role was to be a litigator. My role was to be an activist. My role was to push the movement forward and give us wins. And I've humbly and happily accepted that challenge. I partnered with some of the best activists that are around, whether that's Until Freedom and Tamika Mallory, partnered with some of the best attorneys, whether that's Lee Merritt and Ben Crump and Chris Stewart, and just been a part of, some landmark situations. We led the protest in Atlanta that led to 150 days of sustained protest. So, we are on the front lines, and it's just been humbling to be a servant leader in the middle of this year. But we will continue to do that type of leadership. We will continue to hold elected officials accountable, whether it's the president of the United States, the governor, or the mayor, because until Black issues are addressed, we will stay in the streets, and we will stay in the courts, and we will stay in the halls of legislature to make sure laws are changed and that people's rights are protected. So that's what I saw my role in 2020. My role was to be a defender of the defenseless, a voice to the voiceless, and a leader to those that feel left behind.
Let's change the subject just a bit. Again, you have your ears on the street. Not many people you don't know. What are you hearing about Reverend Warnock and his bid for the U.S. Senate? Can he win this race? As you well know, many Black preachers are offended at Loeffler's or his opponents' criticism of the Black church. What are you hearing about Reverend Warnock?
I think Reverend Warnock has an exceptional chance to be the first African-American senator from a former slave state. He's run a very robust campaign, bringing numerous groups together to create an electoral coalition that could send him to Washington. And my hope is that will happen. But we got to get out the vote. We got to get out the vote like we did in the presidential election. We need over 5 million people to vote in this election. And currently we're on pace. About 1.6 million have voted right now, and that's at about 22% turnout. And the African-American vote is about 23.5% turnout. So if we can overperform and make sure we build that coalition of brown people and Black people and white people of good conscience to send him to the Senate, I think he has a good shot. But I also think that he needs to fight back. Some of the attacks on his beliefs, some of the attacks on his personhood, he needs to push back. And that's what people are looking for. They're looking for a fighter. And I think that they could easily tell you that Illinois' Kelly is not good for Georgia. She was an appointed senator. She's not a senator that speaks to the needs of Georgia. I think if he runs on that race and remembers both Metro Atlanta as well as rural Georgia, he can put together an electoral coalition that could win this state.
You're right. There have been critics who say he's not fighting back. There are also critics who are saying he's not armed himself with many issues that support the Black community. He does have his critics now. He doesn't talk, quote unquote, Black enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's always an issue. We've heard that issue before with other African-American candidates. But you remember, you have to build a coalition. Now, I do think that he does speak to African-American needs with criminal justice reform. I've worked with him on numerous times on criminal justice reform and social justice issues. He bailed out Black mothers bailout many times. He had the first expungement summit at his church, and he's hosted social justice national summits. So he's on the front lines. He's marched with me many a time. So I wouldn't question his dedication to African-American issues. I just think he needs to put that to the forefront of his policies and speak to that in the commercials, in the ads, speak to that on the stump speeches, because the key to winning this race is going to be to turn out the 2.2 million African-American voters that are registered in this state. If you can turn out the 2.2 million African-American voters in this state, you will win hands down.
Gerald, finally, you certainly are politically savvy. You're an activist, a legal brain. Will you run for elective office soon? What's in store for you?
At some point, once the people tell me that my role has shifted from activist and attorney to potential legislator or elected official, I will probably consider it. But currently now people need me in the courtrooms and they need me on the front lines. And I always remember the words of my mentors, John Lewis and C.T. Vivian. Always listen to the people, always be with the people. And when the people decide it's time for Attorney Griggs to run for something, they'll tell me. But until that time, my job is to be on the front lines, defending people's rights, making sure that the law applies equally, and making the Constitution be what it says on paper for everybody.
Gerald Griggs is a journalist who's covered civil rights and human rights and politics for 40 years. I applaud you, young man. Thank you for the job you're doing.
Well, thank you for having me on the platform. It's always a pleasure. And anywhere that there's injustice in this state, I'm going to be there and probably around the country. So, we have to remember, though that we've lost two lions of the movement, there is a complete pride behind them. And we will continue to fight for the rights of African Americans in this country, every other minority, and every American that believes in equality for all.
Gerald Griggs, happy holidays and happy new year. Take care.
Happy New Year to you too.